Chi Baik on student welfare. When I was a boy at university in the 17th century, if you complained about anything, they just enlisted you in the English Civil War and hope you never came back. Thankfully it's improved. Thankfully it's changed. I think I've been following your work for a lot of years, and I've been reporting it when reports have come out. And I know you understand this, and I know you know how to make a difference. Tell us how. Chi Baik.
Thank you. I don't know about to tell you how part. It's so complex. Thanks very much, Stephen. Thank you for coming to this presentation. As we've introduced, my name is Chi. I work in the Centre for the Study of Higher Education, where I have for probably about 15 or 16 years, my kind of area of focus has been looking at factors that influence students' experiences in higher education and their outcomes. So the quality of their experiences and their success. And I don't come from a mental health background at all. I'm not a mental health expert, but the problem of student mental health and wellbeing became so prevalent and prominent in higher education that it was something that you couldn't ignore when looking at student experience and what influences their success. And so I have partnered with health experts, psychiatrists, psychologists, sociologists and others to do a program of research looking at student mental health and wellbeing. So today I'm just going to give you some snapshot of a recent 3-year study funded by the Australian Research Council. We've finished 1.5 years of that, so I'm just going to present some findings from the first year. And really my core argument is that student wellbeing or student mental health is not just about mental health, it's actually fundamental to their engagement and their success. And there's really close associations between student engagement and student wellbeing and completion, progress, completion, or another way of looking at it is risk of dropout. So I will move fairly quickly to hopefully leave some time for questions. So I'm happy to return to any slides that I've moved through to. But let's start with the problem, and it's a growing problem. So the graph on your left is from a Hilda study of households that they've done longitudinally now for many decades. And this is kind of a snapshot of young people. So those in higher education or those who will come into higher education, many of them, probably about half of them or more, according to the government's plans. But you can see that the increase in the prevalence of psychological stress, depression, anxiety, severe stress. And the other graph is a larger sample size. It's census data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing 3 points in time. You can see that other than substance use, and that's quite interesting that that's gone down, that in terms of anxiety disorders or affective disorders or other disorders, there's been a pretty sharp increase over those 3 points in time. And this is not just an Australian problem. Studies in other countries, US, UK, Germany, China, we'll just put up a few there as examples. This seems to be a global issue or challenge facing higher education, a challenge related to young people. So mostly, if I was to generalise these studies, we're looking at about a third, sometimes over a third of students reporting high or severely high levels of psychological distress. So a third of our students. Now, some of you may have seen this. This grabbed my attention quite a bit when it came out, this article in Financial Review, talking about, this quite confronting, I think, question. Have young Australians lost faith in the value of uni? Reporting a 13% decline in undergraduate domestic enrolments since 2016. And to me, it resonated because of other studies that we know that young people, undergraduates, are not seeing a connection between what they study and their future selves, their future, who they imagine they will be or what they imagine they will do. And this also, I think, gets to the issue of mental health, related to the issue of mental health in life. And underneath this question or this problem, I think, is a question about the quality of the experiences that students are having. what they hear about what quality experiences students are having. I've shown this, yet over a half, according to Pulse of the Nation survey, are saying that they're not convinced that going to university is going to have a utility value for them. And if we think of intrinsic value, you're going to university to grow, to develop as a human, to study something that you want to study and that you're enjoying. I think there's a lot of research showing some issues there around growing disengagement and sense of loneliness, pretty strongly reported in the UK as well. It seems sort of doesn't make sense that our universities are getting larger and larger. The students are surrounded by other students, but they're reporting an increased sense of loneliness, disconnection, isolation. The latest published quilt results, are saying that less than a third of students are reporting that they've studied frequently, so that connection with their peers is pretty poor in universities. And less than a half are saying that they feel like they belong at universities. And for me, as someone who looks at student engagement, student experience, these are much more telling indicators than the overall indicator of are you satisfied with your overall course experience? Because you will see, 70 to 80% will report satisfaction. But these are the ones that get to engagement, that get to persistence and completion, and fundamental to well-being. And this age of students, young people today, have been described by people who are youth sociologists, people at intergenerational studies. This age has been described as the age of anxiety, what young people are going through. And the sources of anxiety, broadly speaking, are judgment from their peers, judgment from the universities, something about their uncertainty about their environment and their place in the global world, about uncertainty about the future. Why am I doing this? Where is this leading? And of course, young people today, the Gen Zs, are really interested and focused on global issues, social justice, climate change, and other things like that. Compared to previous generations, arguably. That's the argument. So our objectives of the survey part of our 3-year project was really to address this question. What can we provide in terms of evidence to support universities' capacity to better improve student wellbeing? And wellbeing, I'll define it in a minute. And really what I mean here also is student engagement, student motivation. So we wanted some data to investigate these 2 questions. What factors predict distress? What factors predict the positive wellbeing, the flourishing? What can we say about the factors in the university settings or students' experiences that are strongly associated with these 2 outcomes? And then we really are very focused. Students, I've always said, students really are the ones to ask about their experience. So we have a qualitative aspect to this as well, and what do students suggest themselves? So just to define wellbeing, and we take the World Health Organization wellbeing, that it is, when we talk about student wellbeing, it's more than just not being distressed. It's more than just not having symptoms of depression or not having symptoms of anxiety. Wellbeing is when an individual realizes their abilities, their potential, can cope with the normal ups and downs, stresses, challenges of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and able to make a contribution to their community. Now, I've bolded those words because when I look at universities' graduate attribute statements or their mission statements, these are the words that you see. Students will come to our universities and reach their potential. They'll be able to be active citizens and contribute, work productively with their peers. So it's a really strong alignment between what universities espouse that they will develop and produce and what we know about what wellbeing is and means. So my argument has been wellbeing is not a side issue that should be delegated or left to services, but it's a fundamental part of the university's mission and purpose. just want to acknowledge that that it's a, as I said, interdisciplinary, but also international research team. Learning a lot from work from US and Daniel and Nick O'Brien from King's College. So what did we look at in our model? We're looking at, of course, the background factors, individual characteristics like socio-demographic factors, situational stresses, the stress that students bring with them from their situation, financial stress, if English is not their first language, if they've got caring responsibilities, things that universities can't really do that much about. They can support, but these are things that people bring with them, it's the situation. And then, of course, enrollment characteristics. Then what we're looking at in terms of their experiences at university are their experiences teaching and learning in their courses, their perceptions of the value and worth of their course, and course satisfaction is part of that, and their sense of the broader university climate. So the sense of belonging, but broader, whether they feel that the broader climate is supportive of students and their well-being. And the two outcomes that we're looking at are whether these factors, or what extent do these factors explain or predict both distress, but also positive well-being. That definition I showed you before, the flourishing sense of purpose, feeling like you're meeting your potential, positive relationships. So just some results about the situational stresses. So as I said, this is year one of our study. We went to 11 universities in the first year. We have excluded 3 from this analysis because the response rates were just too low to justify inclusion. So these are the results from 8 universities, undergraduate only. So you can see that almost 2/3 are saying that financial situation, separate to the university, financial situation is significant source of stress. About 1/3 are worried about their housing situation or food insecurity or their other kinds of safety. And about over 1/3 are sort of reporting that sort of sense of uncertainty and difficulty to imagine a future or plan for their future. And this would affect their motivation for study. And then, surprisingly, I don't know whether it's kind of lack of self-assessment or self-awareness, but a very small proportion saying that English language is not strong enough. So what does the prevalence do? And this is a little bit complicated, so bear with me. So when we think about mental health and wellbeing, we can't just look at distress or just look at wellbeing separately, because they work together. So some people can have high levels of psychological distress, but also at the same time be flourishing. So you can imagine students who are in a really high stress kind of course where the employment outcomes might be really uncertain, like performing arts, for example, really competitive, not sure you're going to get a job. There's a lot of judgment, performance anxiety. So they might have high levels of anxiety, but they also feel I'm in the right place for me. I'm loving this course. I feel like I'm growing. I have a strong sense of purpose. And so they would be scoring both high levels of well-being and high levels of psychological distress. But on this one, I've just highlighted 2. We've got one at the green, and they are those who are high levels of positive well-being and very low levels of anxiety and depression or psychological distress. So they're about 1/5, absolutely flourishing. Then we've got what I call the really at-risk group. So this group is 15.4% because they had, at the same, in combination, high levels of psychological distress, so symptoms of anxiety and depression, as well as what the theorist Corey Keyes calls languishing. They feel stagnant, like a meh. I've got no purpose. I don't really know what I'm doing here. It's stagnant and lack of personal growth, low levels of sense of purpose. And these students are particularly at risk. When we do an analysis of what kinds of students are more likely or more perhaps overrepresented in this bottom square, it's students who identify as gender non-binary students, LGBTIQ plus students, students with this are really overrepresented in this group. And then these other groups where that high distress is the performing arts, as an example that I gave you. They're high well-being, but they also face a lot of symptoms, perhaps high-level symptoms of just depression and anxiety. Now, why positive well-being is a useful way to think about how we can support students' mental health and well-being is with positive well-being, we know from the research that it's a buffer from psychological distress. So when a population of students have a high level of well-being, it's like the tide that lifts all boats. That it lifts also, it's a buffer or a protective factor for students experiencing psychological distress. So we can say if we add up the percentages, we've got about 40% who have some kind of mental health or wellbeing challenge. 15% I would say are the at-risk group, at risk of dropout, at risk of mental health issues, and we have about a few who are thriving. So what we want to do, I think, as a sector at universities is move the population of students more to the positive wellbeing. So when we look at course satisfaction and just comparing those in that what I call the at-risk, that poor mental health and wellbeing group versus all other students, you can see that across the board they are less satisfied with the quality of the course. They are more doubtful about whether the course has value, both utility value, but also intrinsic value. They are regret or questioning their course choices, and a smaller proportion are positive about their postgraduate career outcomes. Students in this poor mental health and wellbeing group are also far more likely to consider dropping out and have less confidence that they will be able to finish their course at all, and have 3 times more likely to have thought about seriously leaving or dropping out in that year. So who is at greatest risk of dropping out? It's a similar kind of profile to those in the employment quadrant. As I said, those who identify as gender non-binary, those slightly more mature age undergraduate students, Indigenous Australians, part-time students, first in their family to attend, and relative to international. So relative to international, we're seeing a higher proportion of the relative to their proportion. So what are the reasons that they're seriously considering dropping out? Well, about a half. So these won't add to 100 because these were open-ended responses and students write more than one. Although we did ask what is the main reason, but there's a few responses. About a half are saying situational stresses. This ranged a lot of being overwhelmed about their other commitments, whether it's family caring, having to work a lot of hours to support themselves, overwhelmed about their work life, study life balance. It's pretty common in this. And the second one is related to the nature of the experiences they were having and the lack of satisfaction about those experiences. So again, close to a half of students are giving as their reason for dropping out the things that they're experiencing at university. And only 1 in 5 are talking about health and wellbeing, which is different to what you will see in the field data or other, which often has health and wellbeing as another one. Now, our study has not found that because it's open-ended. We don't give them a choice. In other surveys, they get a drop down and they can choose. We just wanted to ask them, you tell us with your own words, why you have thought seriously about dropping out. And then when we modeled this using multivariate regression analysis, the conclusion is here. But when we put in the model, we put the demographic characteristics in, we put the situational stresses in, we put these in, and what we want to know is which is the strongest, which has the strongest association? What would predict it? What explains the difference in mental health and wellbeing scores? And across all institutions, and I have to say I've been running studies with colleagues for probably 13 years now. It's repeated over multiple studies as well. It is these course experiences and university experiences that consistently, there's not one time across any university, small university, large university, regional, DOA, the same pattern. They're strongest predictors of students, both the negative, the psychological distress, as well as the positive, the thriving. Same factors predicted on both ends. So lack of experiences positive experiences contribute or explain the variance in psychological distress, and regular experiences, positive experiences, predict or explain the thriving inflation. So these were stronger predictors, more so than situational stress, financial strain, more so than uncertainty about whether they're going to get a job, more so than English language difficulties, and a range of those demographic factors. And I'm not saying that those other factors don't predict a certain proportion. They do. You can see in the table, for example, step 2, situational stresses predict 11.3%. So you add each step. So the 20% that the course experience is on top of. Right? So it's quite a lot of what it explains. So as I said, we are really interested in hearing from students for themselves. So in all the studies that we've done, we've just asked one single question. And sometimes students write an essay. Some of them have a lot to say. And it's just this single question of what is the single most important thing the university can do to improve student wellbeing. And when we code this, so we had in the first year of our 3-year project, we had about 6,149 responses, which is a very large qualitative sample. You can see, unsurprisingly, that the most common theme was around student services and support, make it more accessible, make it faster for us, make it better quality, make it more flexible, those kinds of reach out first. That was some what students say. It'd be great if the university, if you notice something, why don't you reach out rather than expecting us to always do those kind of comments. But the one that is, I think, somewhat surprising, given we didn't talk in the STEM, I'll remind you, there's no mention of course. All we're asking is, what can the university do? So students, it really supports the statistical analysis about the importance of their experiences in curricular teaching and learning. Here they talk about course value and seeing relevance and meaning in what they're learning. They talk about the approachability of teachers. They talk about wanting to have more structured opportunities to connect and interact with their peers, not in a superficial way. Help to make friends in their classes, not just leaving it to clubs and societies. Really quite insightful comments here. So that, again, this is just, with each study we do, it just provides more and more data and evidence to support what we have been arguing this 2016 study was another national study where we argued that in order to address at a population level the issue of student engagement and well-being, that there has to be a whole of university approach. And whilst I think universities do a pretty good job with services, a lot goes into services and community awareness campaigns. Are you okay? We have all these. There's more things happening with mindfulness and all kinds of programs. So I think the neglected area has been where all students are, which is curriculum. In these other areas, services, extracurricular stuff, the majority of students don't attend. So if our argument has been to institutions, if we want to reach the population level and shift the curve of the population, we've got to look at what we can do more in the curriculum, specifically to help students find a connection to what they are learning, meaning and a relevance to what they are learning in the curriculum, to each other as peers. There's a really important social aspect of learning that I think is being lost, and which gets to one of the earlier slides that showed about student disconnection and isolation that students are feeling. A stronger sense of autonomy in the curriculum, students' choice, students able to pursue things that align with their interests, not a singular focus on employability. That was a really interesting finding that we found from students' comments. Students saying, stop assuming we want and stop assuming and teaching us like we all want to be. For example, biomedicine doctors. Teach us like it's important stuff to know. Students are saying things like that. So this drive to make everything fit into the employability and try to do a direct connection is off-putting for some students, demotivating for some. Other students, of course, love direct connections to employability, but it is, I think, disengaging for those students who are still not quite sure what they want to do. And so I will stop there. If you're interested in the more of the how stuff, we've got a lot of, we've translated this research again over a decade into kind of resources around curriculum and teaching and learning that are known to, I suppose, boost those protective factors and also boost engagement, student motivation. I'll stop there. If you've got any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. That was great. I mean, that was really great.
Oh,
It's granular. Yeah.
sounds so surprised.
Yes. Questions? I mean, I've got one, but I'll hold it. Questions?
I'm a bit tempted to suggest that students should use more drugs because substance use has decreased, and that's, you know, all these problems have happened. But I don't know if there's a causation there. Yeah, but you know, there's something there to think about. But yeah, my question was about, I suppose, staff wellbeing, because kind of what you're saying is that, you know, students are happy if academic staff in particular are happy.
Yeah, I don't know if I am saying students are happy if academic staff are happy, and I think I do want to, I suppose, really strongly emphasise that wellbeing. I mean, there's a hedonic aspect of wellbeing, which is happiness, satisfaction, but really I'm talking about psychological wellbeing, like functioning well and meaning, purpose. And yes, we know that students, that for academics to foster that in students and to give them the kind of relational teaching that we know is supportive of student wellbeing, academic wellbeing is essential. And I always get that question, what about academic wellbeing? It is under research as well. And I think that that is an area that we mentioned too. I have not gone there because I'm only funded for on the student side. But I always get that question, what about us? What about wellbeing or staff wellbeing? And we know that that's
Thanks for the survey presentation. It was wonderful. My question's on the data set on the first two responses, which is around the student experiences or the student services and then curricular learning and teaching. In your survey, was there enough of a differentiation between what's curricular learning and teaching versus student services? As an example, students many times, if they're seeking academic advice as such, might associate that with learning and teaching, whereas it could be a service issue and vice versa?
Yeah, really great question. And yes, we do differentiate that. So there's for questions about teaching and learning, it's very much the questions about their course. So it's about assessment, the way that they're assessed. We talk about in-class or online class. And so they are very much, it's pretty clear. Around the services and support, we ask specifically about academic and language skills. We ask them about co-curricular, because we understand things like academic advising and there are other kind of co-curricular things. So they are quite well differentiated. The course experience items are all, we use validated scales, whereas the services ones, that they are just from our consultations and knowledge about what are the common types of services. So one of the things that we did early on, probably 8 years ago, so it might be outdated, was a kind of typology or a mapping across all, at the time, 40 universities about the different kinds of services and supports that they provide for the students, not just related to mental health, but academic skills, careers, housing, and all of that. So we kind of tried to map out and develop an understanding of what kinds of supports are commonly provided for.
Hi, I'm interested. I'm assuming you share the results with students. What do they tell you? Do they feel validated? Do they feel empowered? Do they ask, what next? What are you going to do? I'm interested in the student response.
Thank you. That's a little bit. Students, sometimes in the survey, they will write in the open comments, thank you so much for doing this. And I hope that something's come out of it. And they can opt in to, we say, if you would like these results, let us know and if they want to leave it. But because it's anonymous, it's an opt-in thing. Not that many students do that, although I have had emails from students later on asking for it. But we try to make it as public as possible. So it sits on a website that's fairly available. We let people know that it's out there and hopefully it gets to the students. But it is really interesting and actually quite gratifying when in the final thing, any other comments, we ask them, they say thanks for doing this. Asking what our ideas are. I think students appreciate, but they also want the what's next.
Hi, you had in there the data with the mature age students. Were there any outliers or interesting differences between the mature age students and the school years?
Yeah, well, again, this is where there was a bit of institutional difference. So one institution, which I can't name, but it's a smaller regional institution that had like a high proportion of mature age students and a high proportion therefore by studying online. They had great wellbeing, and I suspect, and they were more likely to be part-time, and I suspect it's something like this was such a choice for them, and only one aspect of other things that's going on in life, which is maybe more important, and it's chosen to do part-time, and it's flexible, it's online, so other than that one institution, no, there were other significant differences in students. Except that one outlier institution.
Hi there. I'm just interested in the course services and unpacking that in terms of, was there any difference or big differences between what people were learning, how they were learning, or why they were learning that course? So it's kind of just unpacking that in terms of whether who they were learning for was more important than actually the overall learning experience.
Who they were learning
in terms of the teacher or the lecturer or the course lead?
We didn't ask that, and I have to say, didn't come out so much in this study. I mean, in other studies, as I said, I've been looking at student experience. There is a real difference between those who feel like they're doing what I call kind of controlled motivation, because they have to do the course because control expectation or because they got the marks and it's just expected, versus those who are doing that autonomous motivation. It's something that they wanted to pursue and they do want to do it. So we see a difference in those two broad groups, but in this study, we didn't probe that so much. Except there is in the teacher support scale, it does measure or look at teacher autonomy support. And what that means is how much a teacher supports students' autonomy and students' choices, how they respect kind of the differences in students' perhaps aspirations and how students feel, whether students feel like their teachers are acknowledging and respecting of their differences. So there is a little bit of that.
Hi, I was struck by the data around the risk of dropout and the key categories that were most at risk, and couldn't help but note that they align primarily with the equity groups that the federal government now want us to target. So there's obviously going to be a risk for institutions moving forward. What intervention strategies or risk mitigating factors have come out of the research so far that universities could apply to minimise the impacts felt across these groups?
I think that's such an important question because you're right. There is an alignment and an overlap, and we've known that those equity students in certain equity groups are at greater risk of dropping out or not completing with and this study just supports that, but also shows that there's an association between the dropout and we don't know the direction. Like it's not a causal thing. It's probably bi-directional. But some of the interventions that I think have been shown some success is a real focus on the first year. A big focus on that early first year transition experience, not just orientation, but peer mentoring has shown some success. Like close peer mentoring, so those peers who are close in age with peers. In the early analysis data this year, which is a larger data set, I think some of that is showing some efficacy because first year students seem to be doing better than later year students because of these measures of wellbeing and engagement. And even in the sense of belonging, which I was interesting. It's first year students in our current data, which is 14,000 something, reporting higher level of sense of belonging in later years. So something, I think it's many institutions' effort on that transition experience and on getting that first year experience right seems to be, it's looking quite positive, but there is a second year dip. So, I mean, what can be done beyond the first year? Not all attrition is in the first year happens. And there are no easy or simple solutions, but I do think that a focus on connection, what we can do, not just connection to peers, connection to the institution, but connection to what they're learning is important for persistence. It leads to engagement. If you're more engaged, more motivated to persist with challenges. I can only speak for my own institution, and one thing that, because I've run these studies, we've been running these studies for our institution for a while now, repeated over many years, is beginning to see things in policy, in quality assurance of course processes, where course coordinators are asked to report on what is happening in their curriculum to foster peer connection, what they're doing around these other key kind of principles related to wellbeing and engagement, so peer engagement, what they're doing to boost students' competence and self-efficacy. So we are starting to see things being done a little bit more at the systematic or policy level as well, and I think that's critical rather than only relying on one-off support interventions, which may miss many students in the middle. But I think the first year is critical.
That answered my question about if it's disengaging with the course because they're just not happy with it, is there a hell of a lot you can do? Because that's the course.
Yeah.
And yet there are ways to intervene.
Absolutely, yes.
How do I go down?
And it's not that students are saying, I'm just not happy with my course, because the students will have, most, not all, will be doing multiple subjects at the same time. And some subjects they might just be more interested in, and other subjects. So it's not a matter of dissatisfaction. I'm happy in this subject. I'm not happy subject. It's the overall experience of whether they feel like something has value for them. I really think it's not a satisfaction question as much as it is whether they see that this is worth their investment of time, energy, effort. Is it worth being at university and doing this course? It might be hard, it might be boring, but I can aligns with my future goals, my values, or what I imagine for myself in the future. I think it's those kinds of things. So it's not, yes, at the subject level, it's important, but I think it is at the whole of program, the whole of course, looking at it more holistically about what universities can do to boost students' kind of these regular experiences, feeling connected to what they're learning and what it means to be a student at university. It's a very simplistic answer, but that's just in a nutshell.
Is it time to nuance the student satisfaction survey?
Oh, I've been saying that for years, including to the quilt. I mean, I understand it because it has to be really short, but really it's a single item that at the end that's used to rank universities, and the difference between the top and the bottom is like 10%.
Yeah.
It is, but it's these other scales that are given less attention to that I think are better indicators of things like dropout or risk of dropout or completion or success. And that is peer engagement scale, a sense of belonging. Again, flawed because it's only a single item, whereas a true belonging scale will have multiple items, but it's because it's pragmatic, they can't make the survey long. So I think there is an overemphasis on the single item satisfaction scale because, you know, regularly 80% of students say they're satisfied. 80 to 85, but we've got 35, 40% dropout.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it's not that informative.
One more very quickly. How do academics respond?
So what I didn't show is if I was presenting this, you know, around course design, they respond really well, generally speaking, because the reluctance from academics is, oh, are you asking me to do more? Like more on top of their already busy workloads, or I'm not a mental health expert, I don't want to provide students with this kind of support. But really, the things that we know from evidence that support and foster wellbeing are really just the other side of engagement. They're just so closely related to engagement. So the strategies or the evidence-based types of approaches that we talk about are things that resonate with academics around how to just boost student motivation, how to be more responsive, how to perhaps move from a transactional kind of interactions with students to much more thinking about the relational dimension of pedagogy. And it resonates with academics. Having said that, the academics who come along are those who are already interested, right? So like in anything, the academics who are already thinking about it will come along and then it'll resonate with them. And there'll always be a group of academics who are sort of, yeah, but you know, sink or swim. Back in my day, there were none of these counselling services or all this fuss about relationships, peer engagement. Do you know physics or not? It's you know, that kind of thing. You'll always get those, and I just think that's fine. But I always go with the assumption that most educators really want their students to get the most out of their education in their subjects. And they're pretty. We've had a lot of support.
Can I ask one last question? What's the ratio of international students?
In the data set, international students were slightly underrepresented, but we weighted the data. That's why we weight the data to make sure that our findings are proportionate to the profile.
Thank you, Professor Beck. Sorry.